Okay, so this is our intro to fact value, and note that fact and value are just two of the three possible case types, and we'll be going over all of them in this review slide. So, just a reminder there are three case types. There's fact, which is just about debating a truism, or affirming or denying the resolution. We have a value, which is about weighing two things on a value, or comparing two elements in the resolution. And then we have policy, which is about taking action versus accepting the status quo. Today, we're just going to be covering fact and value, and let's jump into it. So, when we're looking at a fact case type, we're just going to be analyzing whether or not a resolution is true or not true. Some easy indicators in the resolution are will and is, and an example is a libertarian will win the next election. Note here that we're just analyzing whether or not this statement is factual, not whether it's good or bad, and that it has this indicator word, will, within the resolution. All right, now let's look at the structure. So, this is the structure of the top of case for a fact round. And a top of case just means the way that the government team is going to define the round and set up this debate. So, after you say your thank yous, after you state the resolution, you have these definitions on the gov. Remember, the gov's right to define is very important, and it also gives it the ability to narrow the scope of the round. So, these definitions are immensely powerful. Not to mention that it also ensures that both the Gov and the Op are on the same page. For instance, this definition of the upcoming Texas governor election. That way, both the Gov and the Op agree that we're talking about the November 8th, 2022 Texas gubernatorial election, not the one in November 8th in 500 years, for example. So, this ensures that we all know what the debate is about. Better work is also defined as an important term in the resolution. A key thing to remember is that the government team has the right to define initially. However, if they do not define a term in their first speech, they give up this right to define, and the right falls to the op. Therefore, it is essential that the gov define any relevant and important terms, in this case, Beto O'Rourke, which is an American politician who is standing for election. So, here, Beto O'Rourke as an important term is defined, and upcoming Texas governor election is defined. Also important is the idea of win. Now, its definition is prima facie. Now, literally in Latin, that just means let it be defined at face value. So, at face value just means that the government team is saying, op, we all know what the term win means. We have no need to give a special definition, and we should just operate off the assumption that we know what winning an election is. However, we're not relinquishing our right to define, thus, we choose to define it as prima facie. So, in this case, prima facie is important to relevant terms that don't necessarily need a special definition, such as win. All right, there's one more element to the top of case which is important. That is the idea of a weighing mechanism. Weighing mechanism is just a fancy term for how the judge will weigh the round. So, in this case, for a fact resolution, the weighing mechanism never changes. The weighing mechanism is preponderance of evidence based on quantity and quality. What does that mean? Well, in other words, whichever team can prove with their reasoning or evidence, which doesn't always mean statistics but can also just mean logic, and the quality of that evidence, as well as the amount of it, should win the entire round. So essentially, the judge has a way of using this knowledge to compare it to one another and to weigh the round and choose a winner. So again, preponderance of evidence based on quality and quantity is always going to be the weighing mechanism. It never varies for a fact resolution. A thesis is just where you plug in all the definitions into the defined term in the resolution. So for us, the thesis would be Robert Francis Beto O'Rourke, an American politician which served as the U.S. representative for Texas's 16th congressional district from 2013 to 2019, will win the upcoming November 18th, 2022 Texas gubernatorial election. So I just restated all the terms by plugging them in to the resolution with the place where the terms are defined. Now, what's important to remember about a thesis is it's not like a thesis which you might have in an English class or for writing a paper. Rather, this kind of thesis is simple. It just is plugging in the definitions to the places in the resolution with defined terms. Okay, now let's look at contentions, which is just a fancy word for arguments. So this is where you're actually going to state your arguments, while the top of case was just so that the government team could set up the round. So remember, both gov and op have contentions, but on the op, they're called counter contentions. Contentions are always structured in Toulmin's model, which is the claim, the data, and the warrant, which is often even commonly taught at school. So you can have as many of these arguments or contentions as you want. So these abbreviations, contentions or counter contentions, can be as numerous as few as you would like. However, I personally recommend about 2 to 3 because one is too few, not enough arguments on the flow, and more than three, like 4 or 5, becomes too numerous, too many to say in one speech, and also tend to be weaker because you have less time to prepare them. So 2 to 3 is a sweet spot. I recommend having contention somewhere in there. All right, now let's examine these contentions as if we're operating under this resolution. Okay, so here is a contention, which means it's an argument for the gov about popularity. The claim here is about how media coverage is beneficial to the Better O'Rourke campaign. Okay, so I have this data, which isn't actually statistics, rather, it's reasoning or logic that I'm demonstrating about the media coverage that Beto O'Rourke has. So while this is not statistics, it's still perfectly viable evidence. Now, the warrant here is important. The warrant is stating, since I've just proven that the claim is true, because my evidence shows this, then therefore there's another reason to vote Gov, because this whole resolution is supported by my warrant. So the media is the lens through which people view things. This coverage will lead to more positive votes for O'Rourke, which adds to his overall campaign. Therefore, this resolution is supported, and this is a reason to vote for the government team. So, this contention about popularity is indicative of what is necessary for a contention, which is to have a claim and to have this data backing the claim, and then a warrant explaining why this proves the resolution is true or false. All right. In the case of the opposition, they just have a counter contention, but it has the same structure and same concept. So this is about the popularity of Beto O'Rourke's main opponent, which is Governor Abbott. So this discusses how, with a statistic, which is another valuable form of evidence, Abbott is more popular. And so the warrant states, since Abbott is more popular, it is likely that he will win the election instead and not Beto O'Rourke, indicating that this resolution is false. So this warrant is used to back the overall resolution by saying if this claim is true, then X. You should vote X way because it demonstrates effectively that it either proves or disproves the resolution. All right, now let's look at value. And value rounds are a little bit more nuanced than fact rounds. So, for value rounds, we should be weighing two things based on a value. Some easy indicators in the resolution are more blank than blank, on balance, good versus harm, or two things in the resolution. For instance, we have rent control does more harm than good, and this almost fills out all of our cool, easy indicators. We have a more blank than blank, we have a good versus harm, and we even have two things in the resolution, the harm and the good. Okay, so let's examine what a value case type is going to look like. A value case type also has a top of case where the government sets up all of its definitions and scopes the round. However, instead of having a weighing mechanism, it has a value. So let's pretend our resolution is e-scooters do more harm than good. All right, so we've defined e-scooters, which is a relevant term, and we've defined harm and good as net detriments and net benefits. Note that harm and good can also be defined here as prima facie, since we all really know what harm and good mean. Now, we also have this value, and this is where the gov right to define becomes especially powerful. A value is going to be your scale, or the way you measure which side is going to win. A value can be pretty much anything. So we can have efficiency, we can have equity, we can have fairness, happiness, generally broad concepts which adhere to the idea of a goal or a mission that you're trying to achieve with this resolution. So, for instance, e scooters do more harm than good. Our value is quality of life. So, what that means is I'm saying e scooters, using the value of quality of life, do more harm to quality of life than good to quality of life. That's useful because, firstly, it gives a way for the judge to decide who is the winner, because the team that proves that e scooters either do or don't do harm to quality of life more effectively should win the round. A second important idea of a value is because it narrows the idea of just quote unquote harm and quote unquote good. See, if we just say harm than good in general, that would be way too broad. Are we saying it's harmful because it causes injuries and that's bad for safety? Or are we talking about it does good because it makes people happy? Well, all of those are super broad and all encompassed within the idea of harm and good. So, with a value like quality of life, we narrow that down a little bit. So, that's important to ensuring that we have a clean round and narrowing the amount of arguments that can be brought up on the flow. Now, we also have our thesis where we just plug and play. We stuck our definitions into the relevant part to the resolution, and we created our thesis. Okay, now let's look at an example. And remember that value case types also have contentions and countercontentions as its structures. Remember, the top of case has no real argumentation in it. Rather, the arguments are what ensure that the judge votes for you. Therefore, value case types also have contentions and countercontentions, however, the warrants are slightly different. So, we have our claim for the government team that e scooters are unsafe. Now, what's notable here is our warrant does not just prove that it backs the resolution. It says that forced physical health results in net detriments to their quality of life. It's important to keep in mind that quality of life was our value for this round. Therefore, since this claim is true, we're saying that since this claim is true, it is harmful to quality of life, and it is clearly another reason to vote Gov. Because remember, the reason that we're having this value is a way to weigh the round. So, since we're directly touching quality of life, we're tipping the scale in the favor of the government team. Now, the opposition team should have the same general idea when they're writing their counter contentions. So here, they have the claim that e scooters are good methods of transportation. Now, their warrant says, well, since the claim is true, which we've proven with our data, e scooters uh, make people more successful, which improves their quality of life because it creates cheaper and efficient transportation. So here's another touch on quality of life here. So, evidently, e scooters are good for quality of life, demonstrating that using that scale, they do good. So this is a way that the op can use this value as well to in their warrant to create powerful counter contentions that are compelling and will win the round because again, the judge is going to weigh on who can prove that quality of life is either harmed or benefited. All right. So, with that being stated, here's a little Venn diagram which compares the case types of fact and value. So, fact case types are focused on whether or not the resolution is true or not true. The fact rounds also have a weighing mechanism which never varies and is always preponderance of evidence based on quality and quantity. Value case types, meanwhile, don't just determine whether or not the resolution is true or false, but rather weigh two things in the resolution. Instead of a weighing mechanism, they have a value, and the value can be anything. However, both case types, when it comes to the actual argumentation, have contentions and counter-contentions. When Toulmin's model with the same structure, however, it's important to remember that their warrants must connect back to either this concept of preponderance of evidence or the concept of the value and weighing the two cases. All right, so now let's look at this last final note. The op's burden is to reject the resolution, not prove the opposite. So, if we remember the concept of presumption, this makes a lot more sense. So, for example, interventionism does more harm than good. The op's burden is to prove that an interventionism is at least as good as it is harmful, not that it is more good than harmful. All right, so let's put it this way. The op does not have to prove the opposite at all. So if op had to prove the opposite, then that would be interventionism does more good than harm. It doesn't have to prove that. Op can say, look, interventionism does both harm and does both good. They are equal. Therefore, op wins. And that's a totally fair strategy and gives the op a lot of power to counteract the gov's ability to define. Meanwhile, for instance, let's look at this resolution. Chocolate is better than vanilla. Gov has the burden of proving that chocolate is unequivocally better than vanilla. However, Op only has to prove that vanilla is at least equal to chocolate. So this is very important, especially for value rounds when you're comparing two things, because op has the ability to say that the two things are equal and that one does not supersede the other. So, this idea is very important when you're considering weighing the round, and so that has been the presentation about the intro to fact value. And I hope you learned something.